All right. So what I'm going to cover this evening is how we track our fire danger here in Mesa County. Um, there are a lot of factors that go into this, as you see. A lot of it's really mostly science-based, but then some of it is on top of the science-based is actually ground truthing of having crews go out and seeing what's really on the landscape and how things are going to burn. And then one of my jobs is to convey this information to all the fire chiefs here in Mesa County, the Mesa County Sheriff, and the Mesa County Emergency Manager. So this isn't all kind of just done in a vacuum, even though just the public itself might not know that this is all going on behind the scenes. This is going to be kind of a glimpse into what we're doing and how what science we're using to come up with this our fire danger indices. So fire danger tracking, it's a continuous process. It's a process that we really start even probably start monitoring as early as March. That's when we start getting our fires when fuels are still dormant, and we're really tracking all the way through into November of what's going on. And the things that we're looking at are the fire indices, essentially how hot is that fire going to burn if we have one, what the live fuels are doing, and then what the expected fire weather is. So our fire danger is actually based on a program. It's called the National Fire Danger Rating System, or NFDRS. It's been a program that's been in use since 1978 that the BLM, the Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the National Park Service use. Currently, we are on version 4 of that. So NFDRS, it uses an algorithm that links the fuel models, which we'll cover here in a little bit, and the actual current weather. This is pulling weather every day at 1300 or 1 p.m. and goes into a data system. And then we use certain softwares to help get the algorithm to how we can read what's going on the ground. How we gather these is we're using remote automated weather system, or ROSs, as you might know or can tell that we love acronyms in fire. So these we have, and you'll see on a map on the next slide exactly where those are located in Mesa County. All the ones in Mesa County are actually BLM. There is one U.S. Forest Service one up on the Uncopadre. And this is tracking 24/7. This is tracking every hour. We are getting live observations from these. So we know the temperature, the relative humidity, the wind speed, the direction, and then what our kind of our dead fuels are doing at that time. And we'll get into that also here in just a minute. So this is the breakup of the fire unit that I work on. If you look to the more to the west, you can see those purple little pyramids are where our ROS stations are. So we actually have one up towards Douglas Pass that's called Demery. That's actually in Garfield County, but very pertinent for us to use. Down to the south, we have one in Glade Park. That's called Little Dolores, and that's on BLM. And then a little bit further to the south there, you see Jack's Canyon. That's the one that sits on the G-Mug Forest, but another one that we use quite a bit. And then a little to the west is Pine Ridge. That's closer to Debec, up in the Wild Horse area, just outside of the wilderness study area. So these three, actually these four, we're monitoring at all times. We can see every hour what's going on there, and we can really kind of see what's going on that day, and we can track trends. Now, this is where I'm going to really confuse you. All of this data, this hourly obs and these daily obs, goes in, and then this is the algorithm that you can kind of see what's going on. From the hourly obs on the top left to the daily obs on the top right. Those go down to the flow chart. And what we are really looking at is that bottom part. We're looking at the ignition component, the spread component, the burning index, and the energy release component. The ERCs have a direct correlation to whether we are in or whether we are out of fire restrictions. And then some of the applications you see at the very bottom, it indicates what our staffing index is going to be, meaning how many people we need on that day. Should we have extended staffing? Likewise, with the staffing level, do we need to have other additional resources? Is that going to perhaps put us into severity, where we need to have additional resources coming in from out of region because our fire danger is so high? We don't have the firefighters really to fight a huge fire beyond that 24-hour shift, so we bring in extra help. And then the adjective danger rating system you see, that is just what we call Smokey's arm. Anytime that you see a fire danger sign, that's typically where Smokey's arm is pointing, whether it's low, high, very high, or extreme. So all of these algorithms are used for all kinds of different applications, including fire restrictions. So additional applications for NFDRS, some I already talked about, but really it's that severity. It does help us with prescribed fires and wildfires. In particular, if we know that our fire danger is too high, then we're not going to be doing any prescribed fires. Likewise, with fire management, we know how effective we're going to be suppressing a fire, or whether we need more resources or change our tactics with that. Here's that smoky arm, or the adjective fire danger rating system. So the fuels that go into calculating this are the fine dead fuels, which are essentially grass. When you look outside and you see your cheatgrass, and you see that's the fine dead fuels, and that is the primary carrier of most wildfires, is going to be those fine dead fuels. Then on the contrast over to the right there, we have those 1,000-hour fuels. And those 1,000-hour fuels are what is really driving what we call the ERCs, or the energy release component. And on each ROS station, it has a fuel stick attached, and it is actually taking the really the RH and all the ambient weather, and it is changing within that. The fuel stick itself is either getting more moist or drier. And so with these calculations, we can tell what the 1-hour fuels are doing, the 10-hour fuels, the 100 and the 1,000-hour fuels on an hourly manner. Once again, the 1,000 hours are really what drives that energy release component, and that energy release component is really what drives our fire restrictions and whether we're in or we're not. So the ERC is really, it's related to the flaming front of the fire. How hot is the flaming front of the fire going to be? And that's measured. Some of you have probably, when you're furnace shopping or buying firewood, you probably heard the word BTU, or British Thermal Unit. Well, ERCs are based on that BTU, or that British Thermal Unit. The higher the ERC, that means the more BTUs will be produced from that fire at the flaming front. The lower the ERC will be the lower flaming front. So that indicates whether we're going to be into high fire danger or not. Now, how do we get these information? You can see these are what we call our, these are all of our fire danger rating areas: low elevation, middle elevation, and high elevation. And then you can look to the right of that where the SIGs and ROS stations are. And so we know from just looking at this, we have Little Dolores, we have Demery, we have Pine Ridge. And so we really want to pay attention to the low elevation, but we also have Jack's Canyon. So we fall under the middle elevation for our fire danger rating area. The high elevation there, Deep Creek, Dow Junction, and Soda Creek, those ROS stations are in Summit County, Eagle County, and Garfield County up on the flat tops. And so we don't have representation per se on top of the Grand Mesa, but we can look at this high elevation and we know if these other areas within our fire danger rating area are kind of have that higher ERC, then we can project and predict that the Grand Mesa will fall under that. This is what our ERCs look like. We really use 10 years average for our ERCs, and then we overlay. You see 2001 and 2021, 2020, and then 2012. The reason why we use 2020 and 2012 is these are an indicator to firefighters exactly how big a fire could get that day and what to expect if you respond to a fire. So we want to use those super rememberable years that firefighters can relate to. 2020, we had Pine Gulch, we had Grizzly Creek. 2012, we had that was Pine Ridge in Quebec. That was a 14,000 acre fire. That was our largest fire until Pine Gulch beat it in 2020. So that's why we use those years so we can really relate to the boots on the ground. Hey, this is just like that Pine Gulch day. So be heads up. So more importantly with the ERCs, they're cumulative or they're a build-up factor, meaning that they don't necessarily sway. If we get a little bit of rain, it's not going to all of a sudden the ERCs are going to plummet. Okay, it's a trend that we watch over the season. We use 10 years of data to kind of compare where we are. It's a great tracker of our drought conditions. And once again, it's not affected by short-term weather changes such as it's a cloudy day today, or we got a little sprinkle last night. And also it's not affected by the wind. And then we use percentiles, trigger points, that kind of is the outcome of our fire restrictions. Once again, severity, resource ordering, preparedness level, but also our business thresholds of what some industries can do. In particular, the logging industry can do while on the landscape. Usually that's the Forest Service problem, not necessarily a BLM issue. So next component that we use is our live fuel moistures. So you can kind of see the herbaceous fuels are on the top right. That's going to be your sage and some of those brushes. And then we have woody fuels, which are going to be your trees. So this is the objective of gathering live fuel moistures. It assists us in predicting what wildfires are going to, how they're going to respond that day. Once again, it can base our severity funding, meaning we can get more resources in to help us out because we know if we get a fire that we're going to need additional help. We also do it on prescribed burns to know exactly what is going on in that particular site for our live fuels. And then we can know if they're too dry, we're not going to burn, or if they're within that prescription, then we can burn. It also can determine some of the post-fire resource effects. How severe is that fire burning? Are we in high thresholds? Are we going to need to have extra resources to come in post-fire and seed or do other types of rehab work? And then it validates our NFDRS calculated outputs. And so when we look at this next slide, these are essentially the max that fuels can get at 300, 200. You can see it's moisture is still developing. The 100 is essentially that 100 is going to start burning. 50 is entering dormancy, meaning it's getting towards probably November, December. And then anything 50 and below, that means it's completely cured. It's dried out and it's ready to burn. And so typically the 50 and 30s we won't see until really, November through March, and then we start greening up. And so our crews are actually gathering the first fuel samples this week. But a lot of our sage should be over that 200. Our oak brush will probably be well over 100. So we're still kind of going up in the green phase of that. This is actually kind of the calculation that we use when we measure and we weigh and calculate our fuel samples. These here, we're going to look really to the left of the screen. We're going to see we have 3 fuel samples, our gathering sites. Once again, we have one up in Demery, which is closer to Douglas Pass. We have one called Spear Hunter, which is right near that Y. That's in Debec. And then we have one further to the south up Canna Creek. And that's the one that the U.S. Forest Service uses. We use those 2 ones to the north. We'll see the next slide how old we have for data, but we actually physically go to these sites twice a month. We try to do it on the 1st and the 15th of every month, and we are gathering live fuels, sage, pinyon juniper, Gamble's oak is really what we're focusing on. And then we also gather those 1,000-hour dead fuels, and we're putting those in the oven too. And so we can verify and validate what's going on with that NFDRS process. And this is where we're actually physically ground truthing and seeing if the data we're getting from our ROS stations are correct or incorrect. These are the sites that we have. What we're really looking at is Garfield County, that Demery. You see, we gather juniper, oak, and sage. That was created in 1999, so we have a lot of data that we can use there. We also use down towards the bottom that Spear Hunter. That one's in Mesa County. That's in Debec. Once again, that's juniper, Gamble's oak, and sage. We have data going all the way back from 1999 on that. And then the Canna Creek one has not made it on this list. So when we tell fire managers that we are at the lowest that we have ever been, well, we have over 20 years of data that they can look back on, and they can be like, wow, okay, it's really dry. And in 2020, we definitely were hitting those historic lows as to why our fires were so active and just crazy. These are our local thresholds that we look at as firefighters. If it gets to this number or below, we know that we can have active fire behavior on the landscape. So our sage, if it's below 125, right now I'm guessing it's 200 at least and probably climbing. Gamble's oak below that 125. Once again, I'm pretty confident it's over that 125 right now. Spruce, and then the pinyon juniper. Interesting thing about pinyon juniper is it rarely gets above that 90. And so it's a juniper in particular is a fuel model that just is always dry. It just lives in the driest, soily, sandiest sites. It just does not get very much fuel moisture in it. Got a question?
Yeah, I was just going to see, PK, we've talked a couple of times about 1 hour fuels versus 1,000-hour fuels. Can you take a second and explain that for us?
Absolutely. So those are going to be your dead fuels. Those are all your dead fuels. So a 1 hour fuel is essentially a blade of grass, a piece of cheatgrass. Okay. A 10-hour fuel is going to be a stick that's on the ground, maybe the size of your finger is about a 10-hour fuel. Okay. So just picture walking around on a ponderosa pine forest or up in the juniper forest. You see just a stick on the ground, kind of just dead. That's going to be, about the size of your finger. That's a 10-hour fuel. The 100-hour fuel is going to be a little bit bigger in diameter, and then the 1,000-hour fuel is the biggest. And why are they called ones, tens, hundreds, and thousands? It's because it takes 1,000 hours of some type of whether it's moisture, snow, rain, to really make a big difference in that 1,000-hour fuel becoming more saturated. Whereas the 1 hour fuel, it only takes 1 hour of rain because of the size and the diameter, it's also known as what's known as the time lag, whereas something so small, it only takes 1 hour to get wet. But on the contrast, it takes 1 hour for that to dry back out and be flammable again. Whereas the 10 hours, it takes 10 hours of either moisture, precip, snow to change that. And then it takes 10 hours of direct sunlight to essentially reverse that order and make it burn. And then likewise with the 100 and the 1,000. And so the 1,000-hour fuels obviously has the slowest time lag or the slowest reaction rate to what's going on around it. That's why the 1,000 hours we use so much, because those 1 hour fuels, 1 hour they get rain, they're not going to burn. 1 hour they're going to get sunlight, it's going to burn again. So does that help clear that up a little bit?
Yeah, thank you.
And then this is what we're looking at. These are the charts that we look at. This gets entered into a national database. And so any fire manager anywhere in the country can see what's going on these particular dates at these particular locations. And you can kind of see those numbers that we talked about. So this is Sage. We have June 1st, it's at 222. So our critical threshold's at 125. So we know we're good there. And you go all the way down, we know we're good. June 1st has always been pretty good for us. Where on the contrast, we go over to July 15th. Well, we can see we've had some pretty low years, and the super low, the historic low is 85. Anything below 125, we know that we're going to have a pretty extreme fire in the Sage, and this was at 84. So that is going to lead to definitely some very extreme fire behavior, and the degree of difficulty of suppression is going to be rather enormous. These are a couple of references. I couldn't attach this, Ellis, into the chat. Maybe that's something that you would want to do. So next we're going to look at fuel loading and fuel types. So we have 4 different types of fuel models. These are the old fuel models, the 1 through 13. This is when we're talking to fire managers or we're talking as firefighters. You can say, oh, though that fire's in, fuel model 6, and we kind of all know what the fuel model is, and then what to expect in terms of fire behavior from that, and also our tactics. So fuel models 1 through 3 is really going to be that short grass, typically your 1 hour fuels. Once cured, it can lead to rapid rates of spread. It's greatly influenced by wind. And these, we tell firefighters all the time, these are not the fires that you can outrun. These fires will outrun you. So make sure that you're always in a good spot when you're fighting fires, or be super heads up, because you're not going to be able to outrun this fire. It's going to outrun you. The next fuel models are our brush and shrubs. You can kind of see right there, pinyon juniper, sage, oak, and mountain brush. So with this, just as a little side note, pinyon juniper is known as fuel model 6. Fire can burn through the surface and the shrub strata with ease once dry. Recommended moderate or required moderate wind for higher rates of spread. Short range spotting occurs. So typically with a fire that's in that fuel model 6, or primarily, actually oak brush is also fuel model 6, but we're going to focus on pinyon juniper. You need to have wind typically for that to move, mostly because in those decadent stands, there's not much surface fuel. And so for it to get to crown to crown to crown, you're going to need wind. These are typically short duration fires, meaning that once the wind stops blowing, typically the fire progression in the pinyon juniper stops, and that's when fire crews can really get around and start getting good suppression on that fire. Fuel models 8 through 10 are timber. What we primarily have, example, fuel model 8 would be cottonwoods. It's hardwoods, leaf litter. Fuel Model 9 is what you see right there, Ponderosa with the needle cast understory. So up on the Unk, we have a lot of Fuel Model 9. Fuel Model 10 is going to be a more decadent and kind of a sicker forest. So we're going to see that more up on the Grand Mesa, or an area that hasn't burned in a long time with a great accumulation of fuels. In these fires, definitely fires can run through the surface litter. Closed stands of timber will be more intense just because there's more fuels. There's going to be a greater concentration of dead and down materials. And with these, it can create kind of more of a mid-range, kind of a longer range spotting. In particular, the fir, the subalpine fir, and the spruce. And then the last fuel model we have is slash, which is 11 through 13. Typically where we see slash is going to be, there's not a lot of logging around here. So most of the slash that we see is that beetle kill. Summit County, when you go through Summit County, remember 10, 15 years ago, and everything was dead, and now it's coming down on the ground. So that has become a timber model, and now is turned into a slash model because that stuff is down on the ground now. So with this, definitely there's typically slower rates of spread, but there's going to be more intense heat because of all the concentration of fuel. And so those BTUs are going to be the highest in the slash model. The intensity and the heat that's coming off, the radiant heat is going to be the highest in here. Spot fires are definitely likely if this stuff is dry enough that it's burning. This will keep spotting into itself. It's very difficult to suppress. Oftentimes you have to use heavy equipment for this to put in lines, and you're going to need a lot of water. Just one engine and 300 gallons and 3 people is not going to cut it for this fire. All right, last, we're going to look at our fire weather forecast. This is something that we are looking at once again all the time, using National Weather Service products. Really everything derives on the National Weather Service. And that's really the go-to for us. So we're always looking at the 7-day forecast, not just for kind of fire danger, but we're also looking at potential for fire restrictions. Are also based on what our 7 days are going to do. Is there any relief in sight? So we look at the 8 to 14, the 10 to 2 week, the 1 month, and we look at the 3 month. And so this product right here is an 8 to 10 day. On the left, you can see is temperature. The deep red means that we know we're going to be above average here in Western Colorado. And then on the left, we see that's precipitation. So we know that we're going to be below average on receiving any type of precipitation. So above average on temperature, below average on precipitation. We already know right there that does not spell out good things for fire management and fire suppression. And then we also use the U.S. Drought Monitor Index. This was actually from just the other day. So you can kind of see where we are in Colorado for our current drought. We're actually sitting really well compared to where we were 12 months ago. We were really in that deep, we're in the D3 mostly. And then by July, we're in that D4, the highest drought index, the highest the drought index goes. So you can see right now, we're doing okay. We're kind of in that D1. We're in moderate drought. Some areas of our unit, Picken County, they're just abnormally dry. They're actually not even in official drought. So that's great. We haven't actually seen this probably since March of 19, or the spring of 19 was the last that this was looking good. 2020, 2021 was not favorable for us. And next, we're going to talk about red flags. What constitutes a red flag versus a fire weather watch? And so the red flag is issued by the National Weather Service. They know that something is either occurring now or will occur shortly, so they issue that red flag warning. The fire weather watch is what they're seeing a day or two before. They're looking at their computer models and they see something that could create that critical fire weather. Conditions are possible, but they're not imminent or occurring at this time. And so that's why they like to give the public as much warning that, hey, today is, what's today? Today's Tuesday. All right, so we're in a fire weather watch for Thursday. All right. And then tomorrow, if they see everything's lining up in tomorrow afternoon's forecast, they will either issue the red flag warning Wednesday evening or Thursday morning, and that they actually know and they see that something's going to be happening. So they always give the watch first, and then if it comes to fruition, then it goes right into that warning. And these are the primary factors that makes a red flag warning. The primary criteria, these have to be these three things below. They have to see on their screens, on their computer models, for at least 3 hours of a 12-hour period. So for us, it's relative humidity at or below 15%, wind gusts of 25 miles an hour or greater, and that can be sustained wind or wind gusts. And then having dry lightning at more than 15% of the coverage of the fire of the weather zone. So if they can see that it looks like we're going to get over 15% of our zone, which this zone is Mesa County, Garfield County, Delta County, if they see that 15% of that is going to be getting dry lightning, which is less than, dry lightning is considered when you have less than a tenth of an inch of rain, then if you have those three factors, that will automatically trigger a red flag. Other factors that include, that go into that are those critical live fuels, meaning that our live fuels are at that threshold where we know that they're going to burn, and there's no chance that they're not going to burn if we actually get a fire. And then the other is cold front with a wind reversal expected. So that's a big heads up for firefighters, huge heads up for firefighters with those. And that's why they try to issue those so that we know, hey, if you're on a fire, your winds might be coming from the west at 1 o'clock, but 4 in the afternoon, they might be coming from the north or even the east. So that right there will trigger a red flag and kind of a heads up and a feeler for us. And that concludes my presentation.
So PK, effectively, you talked about a lot of really great science that goes into fire weather warnings and watches and fire restrictions. When folks see a fire weather warning versus a red flag warning, what can that mean practically for them?
Practically, that means that that signs are being seen that may or may not materialize into a red flag. But if you were to be, I would say, burning debris, if you're burning your ditches, I would probably not burn on those fire weather watch days either, because it could or could not turn into a red flag. But even that watch means that there are some things, some indicators that we are ramping up to that red flag. So the big things are really, if you're going to be burning debris, even with the watch, it might not be a good day for that. But in terms of other things that you would want to prepare for, I'm not super sure that one day would be different from another in terms of, like, like Josh will talk about preparing your house and things. Camping, that's a big thing. If you're going to go camping and it's a red flag, even if we're not in fire restrictions, maybe you have a fire, maybe you don't have a campfire. We can be in a red flag and not be in fire restrictions, because these red flags only last for 12 hours, 18 hours, whereas it takes weeks to build up to the indices that it takes for, like, fire restrictions.
Cool. Thank you. I want to make space for anybody else that has questions for PK before we move on to Josh. Feeling good? All right. Go, Josh, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, I don't have very many scientific tables and graphs, that's for sure. We go off of a lot of what the Bureau of Land Management and the Weather Service does on how we do our planning and our responses, et cetera. A lot of our incidents here in the city of Grand Junction, they're high intensity, short duration incidents, meaning they're not necessarily, knock on wood, they're not necessarily large acreage. They're relatively small. But everything that PK was talking about as far as fuel moistures, ERCs, and a lot of the predictive services information that's out there, that directly affects us here in the city. It's not just something that's up in Glade Park or Mesa or on top of the Grand Mesa. All those things they directly affect how fire behaves here in the city. So we tend to take that into account every morning when we come on shift during fire season, which fire season now tends to start earlier and later. We will bring up the weather forecast in the morning. We'll discuss it as our crews to give people a heads up if there's red flag warnings. And typically our busiest time is in that spring burn season when we do have people burning, and fuel moistures are very dry because they've been cured all winter long. And so like PK was saying is those fuel moistures, especially the grass, dries out so fast. I mean, everybody's seeing that we can have snow in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we can be, chasing fire all over the valley. That's not uncommon. We also do have a little bit of that pre-monsoon activity when we're relatively busy in the city. And then again in the fall when a lot of the grasses are drying out, and we do enter that other burn season. Those shoulder seasons are typically our busiest seasons. And the issue with that we have here in the city is the fact that it is the city. So we have a fair bit of wildland urban interface. And primarily the most of our wildland urban interface is in the Redlands area. We do have some isolated smaller wildland urban interfaces in the north part of the city, and then in just little pockets here and there. So those are kind of a concern for us. I think the Marshall Fire opened a lot of people's eyes on how devastating some of these fires can be, especially when they're fed by dry fuel moistures and very high winds. And we are not necessarily immune to something like that happening here. So we need to be very aware of that as first responders. And I think one thing I would really like to impart as homeowners is to do your due diligence at prepping your house and your property in the event of a fire. That not only does that mean cutting your grass short, but and limbing up your trees, we need to have access that is going to allow our firefighters to safely work in that environment, even make access to the house. I'm sure you've all seen around in parts of town that access is somewhat hampered. People like to be a little bit private, but on that same token, that presents us with a pretty significant safety hazard for our firefighters when we're talking about making access into these properties, or in the event that there's an emergency that we have to evacuate and get ourselves to safety. And so having homeowners take action and be prepared for an incident like this helps greatly. To have an evacuation plan as well. In the event that one of these incidents does happen, it's very fast paced. We don't have a lot of time to make decisions or load up cars and try and get out. A lot of times the egress, your evacuation route, could be cut off. So planning ahead of time will help reduce that stress and that anxiety when it actually does happen. I would say when you are looking at, we talk about in the fire service about defensible space around your structure, around your house, your sheds, whatever. We kind of break it down into different zones. And what we'd like to see, as long as you're living in a relatively flat area, that it's not in a gully or a drainage or like a saddle or a ridge top, because those all affect how fast fire spreads and what intensity it burns with. We want to encourage everybody to have that defensible space. So 30 feet out from your house in a radius, you want it relatively devoid of any fuels that will cause a problem for your house in the event that they do catch on fire. So does that mean you absolutely have to have everything cut down all around your house? No, it does not. Nobody wants that. I know we live in a desert, but everybody likes trees. So something you can do is to get bushes and grasses away from those trees and limb the trees up 4 to 6 feet. That gives your property and your house a pretty significant advantage if fire does happen to go through. And then if you move that radius further out, you want at least 100 feet. I know it kind of sounds like a lot, especially if we're in a smaller subdivision, like a lot of the Redlands, for example, is just a fuels reduction in those areas. And I'm not necessarily even talking about specifically grass and shrubs, although that is certainly included. We're stacks of lumber, combustible furniture, a lot of, if you have vehicles parked in that area, those are considered fuel once they catch on fire. And those present a big issue for us to be able to be successful in suppression. So 30 feet, relatively close to the house, and you want to expand that to 100 feet. And yeah, that will pretty much help you and your property stand a chance in the event that there is one of these a wildland-urban interface fires. And contrary to popular belief, the flaming front of a wildland-urban interface fire, that's the large swath of flames that's coming towards a subdivision or a house, that is typically not when a house does ignite. That's not usually, it's such a short duration event that it doesn't necessarily catch your house on fire right then. It's small things like the ember cast from it. So all the embers that are distributed from the fire, it can end up underneath your deck, into lawn furniture, underneath a car. Another popular place is when people have dead pine needles and leaves in their gutters of their house. That can also present an opportunity for an ember to ignite. So you wouldn't really necessarily think that those small embers can cause such a big problem, but they most certainly can. And more homes and structures have been destroyed by the ember cast and not that initial flame front. Ellis, can you think of anything else I need to add? I know it's kind of a spieling it all out there.
No, I think that's good. I think the ember bit is something that a lot of folks don't know. I think people are becoming more aware of that, but that is just a constant cycle of maintenance, right? Like look around your house at where the leaves and debris accumulate, and that's a pretty good indication that you might need to not only maintain those and clear them out regularly, but you might start looking at that side of your house because that's where the wind is coming from. And you might take that 30 feet and you might make it 40 feet or 50 feet, kind of depending on how much leaves and debris you're having kind of pile up in that area. And then, Josh, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about terrain, because we have a lot of that here, and especially like you talked about in the Redlands, that risk is not uniform up there. And so what makes some terrain more risky than others for folks?
Okay. Yeah. Certainly terrain is kind of commensurate with fire behavior. Fire tends to increase intensity and speed when it's on a slope, we're running in what we call a chimney, which more or less can be a steeper drainage. So an area of concern for us is the Redlands corridor, where we have a lot of those drainages that, they start out pretty shallow as they come off the monument. And as they traverse down to the river, they tend to get a little steeper. So we have numerous drainages that run from the Redlands down to the Colorado River. And those are significant avenues of potential fire, just because there is so much deadened down material in there. There is a lot of grass, and with that, everybody knows that on either sides of those drainage, and sometimes, unfortunately, at the top of them, there are houses. So we have decks over those areas, wooden fences. So that just that increases the risk, and certainly the potential for fire to extend into those residences. Drainages play a big role. We've had several fires. I don't know if anyone can remember. We had one 2 years ago in the Redlands. It was started by illegal fireworks in one of the drainages. And I think we ended up, we did not lose any houses. However, it did threaten about 20 houses. And so, that the topography that we do have around here, there's also areas, Roseville Road, which I guess is more or less an extension of the Redlands, but Little Park Road, there's quite a bit of topography up there, and not to mention there's quite a few light, flashy fuels, meaning that they're very receptive to things like a cigarette or a dragging chain that can spark a fire. And those fires do tend to move very quickly. So logistically, that's also a concern for us.
Well, thank you. And then Martha, I see you put a question in the chat if you want to share a little bit more about that. I encourage you to do that. I'm not sure if she says when we have time to save or wrap houses, is the decision based on if property around the house are firewise or defensible space?
I think she's talking about structure wrap, Josh.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We typically here in the city do not have time to do any wraps on houses. On larger scale incidents where we're working with Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service, a lot of times, sometimes you have days, sometimes you have weeks to prepare structures or subdivisions for the event that a fire is approaching, and it will get there at some point. We don't have that luxury here in the city. Not that that's necessarily a luxury, but we don't have that time. So what we practice, and we've gotten quite a bit better at it, is we just call it structure triage. If you're sick and you go to the hospital and you see a nurse, initially upon your arrival, they'll take your vital signs, they'll look you over, and then they will triage you accordingly on what's your health threat. So it's rated in severity. So we tend to do that with structures. And so in structure triage, we have several different stages, and I won't necessarily go into all of them, but we are so limited on resources, we have to make a quick decision. Sometimes we call it the street view or a quick walk around, whether they're defensible or non-defensible. We have, and I'll go into it just a little bit, we have non-defensible, which is obviously, it wouldn't make any difference, and it also puts our crew in danger to make a stand at that house. There's too much fuel loading around it. Access is poor. Our escape route could be cut off. If you have defensible, the house does have some defensible space. There is adequate clearance for our crew and our engines to work in there to give us a good chance at being successful at what we're doing. And then there's also the defensible standalone, meaning we drive by that, everything is cleared off around the house. It's a stucco house. There's no wood shake shingles. And that is basically a huge relief for us because we don't have to worry about that house. Yes, we'll come back and check later to make sure that there was no ember cast around it. But yeah, we have a quick procedure that we use for structure triage here in the city. Luckily, we haven't had to do a lot of that, but we just need to make sure that we're competent at making those quick decisions. We're very limited in resources in the city. And like I said, these incidents are very fast paced. And, you know, our initial response in the entire city is about 6 units. So we just don't have a large resource to pull from. So it's just very important for us to make those quick decisions and put our resources where we can make the most difference.
Okay, PK, does BLM do structure wraps for rural houses?
So we do have structure wrap on hand, but once again, like Josh is saying, it comes down to time. If we
Okay.
only have an hour or two, we can't mitigate fuels and do structure wrap. So we have it on hand for when we do have our larger fires, but it takes time. And it takes, you know, a 20-person crew, not a 3-person engine crew, to be able to do the work and do the wrap. And then our Rocky Mountain Cache over in Denver, they have loads of structure wrap that we can order if and when we run out of ours.
Okay, I was just kind of curious since, you know, of course, I live up Bull Basin. Just was kind of curious.
Yes. Okay, Martha, I'm tracking who you are.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, but we do, Martha, but it takes time. It does take
Yes.
time. And there
Okay.
are other things that are starting to be used now, such as gels. They're actually putting instead of like that foil wrap, it's a gel substance that goes around, and that can be a little bit quicker, but you need to keep that wet and water it down. And so that takes manpower also.
Okay, I hadn't heard about that one. Cool.
And I think, you know, just adding to what Josh and PK are saying, our stuff moves quickly in town. And so part of the reason we're having these sessions is so that our community understands not only our capabilities, but what they can do in advance. You know, PK and the National Weather Service coming into fire season are putting together all the science for us every week. And like Josh said, our crews are looking every day. But at the end of the day, you know, Grand Junction Fire still only has 6 stations, 6 engines, 6 crews we can call for mutual aid. And we've certainly had plenty of fires where we do that. But we need our community to do what you guys are doing and step up and learn about what we can all do beforehand to help make ourselves a little bit safer and more prepared. Jane, you have a question. It looks like you're on mute. Feel free.
Is that good? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
ma'am, loud and clear.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, I just signed up on my phone for, you know, like the fire alerts, I guess, is what it would be. I mean, I get like the red flag weather warnings, but like how fast, you know, would I be alerted on my phone? Like if, you know, if God forbid, like a fire started coming down Broadway, I don't know where.
Josh, do you want to take that or you want me to?
I think you have a better knowledge of the reverse 911 than I do.
Sure.
Is that, okay, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's essentially a reverse 911 that you signed up for, Jane. So reverse 911 automatically goes to landlines. It does not automatically go to cell phones. So that's one of those being prepared things that you have to opt in for that. And in the Marshall Fire, folks discovered that the hard way. We do have some place-based notifications that we can do where you essentially draw a circle around a map and say, send everybody in this area a notification. So we do have that ability. But more often on these small and fast moving fires, we're using that opt-in system. It can be pretty quickly. So as soon as we get a unit on scene and they have eyes on it and they call for an evacuation, they'll give dispatch the parameters of that, street names usually, and then dispatch will send that out. So, from the time somebody calls 911 to eyes on the fire, you can be looking at in town 8 to 10-ish minutes, depending on where it's at. If you're somewhere like Glade Park, it could be a while longer before somebody is able to get eyes on that fire, right? If it's somewhere more remote. So the answer is it depends. But once we realize there's an evacuation, we get those out as quickly as possible. And our law enforcement officers start going door to door where it's safe to do that to tell folks to get out.
Okay. So 8 to 10 minutes.
Yep, from that first 911 call. And another reason we want you to opt your cell phone in is if you're at work and there's a fire in your neighborhood, you will still get that notification, so that you've got your go kit, you've got everything backed up, you know where your family needs to go to meet up because you've got that evacuation plan and you've already done all that work around your home Josh is talking about. So you don't have to worry about what's in your house that, is irreplaceable because you've got it documented and you've got it backed up.
Thank you.
And, Ellis, I don't really have the ability or the know-how. Firewise.org is a excellent resource, as well as, which I had looked at earlier today. It's a CAL FIRE based website, so it's out of California, but they have excellent information on there, and that's readyforwildfire.org. It's a pretty easily navigable website, and then that does have some of the defensible space graphics for you to follow for taking some of that action.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, sure thing. And I was just sharing with Josh and PK before the call, we've got a neighborhood that discovered that they're high risk and now they're worried and they want to get involved. So if you don't know the risk of your home and your neighborhood, I encourage you to visit Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition.org and look at risk in Mesa County. We've got a map there that you can surf around and see what's going on in town. Cool. Any other last questions before we close it out? All right. I want to thank you all for attending, and I want to thank Josh and PK for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. And if you guys have questions that come later, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I can get you in touch with these two experts if we need to. And I will put my information in the chat, but it's lst@gjcity.org. We are happy to help you out.
Thank you.
Thank you guys, and have a good
Thank
night.
You too.
Right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Uh-huh.
Thank
I think I need to.
Thank you, PK.
Yes, that was much more attended. So that was good.
Yeah,
And
and engaged.
hopefully I didn't put people to sleep.
No, you did great. I think, folks don't know what goes on behind the scenes that you and the National Weather Service are working on, like I said, every week for us, to help keep us educated and aware about what's going on.
Yeah, this is good. I'll note it though on the dead fuels. There needs to be a graphic or two explaining that. The thousands, the hundreds, the tens.
Well, and you did a great job just explaining that concept of like these, green up and dry out really quickly. They're pretty responsive to moisture, but we're looking at the 1,000-hour fuels because they're better for forecasting. you know,
Right.
they're
Yes, for
more
true
stable.
fire danger.
Yeah.
That's why we don't use really the 10s or the 1s.
Right. No,
So-
I think that all made sense. No, it's good. I kept getting kicked off the internet. Were you able to record it?
Oh, I
no?
think it kept recording.
Oh, amazing.
It
Wonderful.
shows that it's started recording, and in my
Okay.
little thing, it actually still might be. So
Cool. Can you just stay on the call with me really fast while I log into my main computer? I'm working from my phone right now.
sure.
And then I will close things out. Cool. Great. Ah.